Hi, I'm Ashley with Campbell. Thanks for investing your time to help your community be a great place to live. Before you watch the video, make sure to click the subscribe button so that we can help you make educated decisions as a board member.
Well, thank you very much, Ashley. I appreciate your time. We see my screen?
Yep, looks perfect.
Okay, very good. Well, thank you very much for having me and for hosting this. We see these webinars all the time, and they cover many, many very important topics, but they seem to center around insurances and roofing and various aspects, but we don't see a lot that cover access control and security. And that was the purpose of this and partnering with somebody like Campbell to get this information out. So a little bit about myself, retired law enforcement executive, 22 years in law enforcement. I was the director of Frenchman's Creek, director of security there for 8 years in Palm Beach Gardens, which was a phenomenal experience. I'm board certified in security management through As Is and been for over 10 years. Recently received my CEPTED practitioner certification through the Attorney General through the state of Florida. And CEPTED is crime prevention through environmental design. My primary business is I travel across the US and I conduct security assessments of residential communities, and I specialize in gated communities and condominiums. I've served as a CAI task force member, rewriting the security best practices manual, and then really conducted webinars for CAI and then CMIA and various different organizations. So that's a little bit about my background. So let's get started with this. Really, this whole access control security best practice was really designed to discuss and outline how security can play an effective and efficient role in property management. And so I just want to also make clear that if I say security, I'm speaking of access control. I know some of the attorneys for some of your communities will say you can never say the word security. And that's fine. That's a lawyer thing. That's great. So I use them interchangeably. So if I talk about access control, security, we're talking about the same operation. So I feel, in coming from Frenchman's Creek, where I was brought up, it didn't matter whether you were part of the security operation or the golf operation or the food and beverage operation or the POA or the HOA, or it didn't matter. You owned every aspect of what was happening. And by taking that ownership, it made it a much more efficient operation overall, a much more pleasant experience for your residents and your guests and your vendors. And so I've adopted that philosophy in putting together this webinar and putting together these topics. So I feel that security, your access control provider, and your staff can play an extremely large role in you being able to efficiently and effectively run your property. They are, in a sense, they're your eyes and ears 24/7. They're there all the time. Sometimes they're in the gatehouse. Sometimes they're at a front desk. Sometimes they're on patrol. Sometimes that's in a vehicle. Sometimes it's on foot. But the idea is, are we truly using these access control or security staff members to the fullest extent? Because if properly directed, if properly trained, you will find that they can really play a significant role in running a better operation. So as we just said, directing the staff and or using also what these companies have is what we call guard tour software. You can actually direct them through this type of software to go do inspections or to make sure that parts of the property have been patrolled or looked at. And again, it doesn't matter whether it's a condo or it's an HOA. When I talk about patrolling, I'm talking about, say, floor-to-floor inspections, stairwells, rooftops, equipment. There is a way to use these staff members who you're paying to be there 24 hours a day through shifts to make sure things are safer, more secure, things are being inspected, things aren't being missed. So some of the examples of the things that they should be doing or could be doing, you're not there 24 hours a day. So whether it be street lights or landscape lighting outages, your irrigation breaks, locating violations of your rules and regulations, whether it be parking or things of that nature, damage to the landscape. These are all things that if you don't require or establish expectations of your security provider to train their staff to do, they're not going to do it. So I feel very strongly that they should be utilized to assist you in running your operation. To continue this, what else can you have them do? For security purposes, you can have them do your fence inspections and perimeter inspections. On a regular basis, they should be inspecting street signs, road signs, building signs for either repair or replacement. They should be looking for things like broken pipes or electrical wires. They should be watching for the lift station alerts. All these things that you're not out there able to do 24/7, that your maintenance people are not there on site 24/7 able to do. If you create a culture or an environment with your security provider where they are part of the larger team, they are an integral piece of the overall operation that is responsible for making sure every aspect is taken care of. When you expect it, when you train them that way, when you reward them for being part of that team, you'll find your operation runs much more efficiently. And really, you know better than anyone your operation, your residents, your buildings. So it's really up to your imagination. What are the things that you need done, want done, or could be done if you had somebody there 24/7 to be able to look into these things? Now, if you're just manning a gatehouse and they can't leave, well, then you're limited. But if on the overnight or things of that nature, you have the ability to have somebody patrol and do inspections and reports, then you can utilize them in a far more effective way. So I'm going to go ahead and click on some samples here that I've put together for different operations. So here is, let me see. Ashley, is that monthly report up? Can you see that?
Yep, I see it.
Okay, very good. So here's the monthly report, for example, that I put together, and these are all the various things we tracked and reported to our property manager. And I just pulled this one, happened to be from 2019. And it talked about the occupancy and then member assist. We're going to talk about member assists. Everything to how many calls we took that day, how many gate vehicles came into the gates that day, how many residents versus guests, how many barcodes did we issue, how many doors did we unlock, if we issued citations, or on the overnight we found open garage doors, how many miles did we put on our vehicle. These are all things that it really, for the security provider, justifies their existence. Now, obviously, this property has patrols. How many alarms did we receive? We had the ISN traffic hawk, so we also did traffic enforcement or traffic calming and issued violations through it. Medical calls. How many medical calls? How many times did fire rescue come on property? Things of that nature. We listed what our monthly training we did. We did what our monthly training was, what any new trainings were, because we also tested things. So we just didn't have like your call boxes out on your golf course or throughout your community. We just didn't wait for somebody to use them that broke down. We went out there and actively test them. Then we had our daily, weekly, and monthly tasks where we inspected our cameras. We made sure the foliage wasn't blocking them. We did checks for when residents were away. We did our exterior perimeter inspections. We inspected our club. We did lighting reports. We inspected our street signs. We did all kinds of different things. The idea being is, again, using your imagination, what is it you can do or what is needed in your community or what would make your operation more efficient by utilizing your security and access control. We reported every time there was an issue with the cameras, gate arms, the vehicles, the gates, then special interest items, if there was significant turnover, things of that nature. These were all things that you are examples of things that you could use this for. Now, this will seem a little crazy to everyone in most places, but here are the different types of things we did. And again, this was with patrol officers, but we did everything from bringing the recycle and garage or garbage cans in to assisting residents with arming or disarming their alarms, picking up newspapers for residents who forgot to stop them and they piled up in front of their house, animals, traffic control, jump starting vehicle. These are all the various things we did. Again, this is typically with your higher end communities with high expectations. We had a Ritz-Carlton style, we didn't say no. We did all kinds of things. We brought in luggage, we moved furniture, we helped with packages, inflated tires, locate lost pets. These are all things that we did. So again, this is kind of the extreme, but it gives you an idea of the various things that we did or that can be done. Another thing now, Ashley, can you confirm that the residential security site inspection checklist is up?
Yep, I see it.
Okay. So I have a saying that I adopted about from an old police chief that I work for. You have to inspect what you expect. And inspecting what you expect doesn't mean you're micromanaging. It's just you making sure the job's getting done, or that in this case, if you have, whether it's an in-house security operation or a third-party provider, you're making sure that they meet or exceed your expectations in all the various aspects of the things that should be done. So what I've done is I've created a list, and it's an easy list, and it can be done digitally. It can be done however you want. But everything from inspection of the gatehouse, making sure everything in the gatehouse is working properly, it's cleaned, it's maintained. Are the gates working properly? Do you have the spare gate arms? Are the switches and buttons working properly? Are the safety loops and beams for the gate arms working properly? Are things being cleaned and maintained? Are the bathrooms clean? You know, is the work environment a clean space? Pest control issues. Is your post order manual in there with your site-specific post orders and how these officers are supposed to be doing it? You know, when a new officer comes or a replacement officer comes, they should be looking at those so they understand how to operate your gates and what your expectations are. Another thing I put in here is have the post order. We're going to talk about this later. Have they been approved and signed off by the board? Is the lighting functional in the gatehouse? Are all the cameras working and aimed properly? Have they been cleaned and maintained? Are the monitors up? The cameras, are they up on the monitors in the gatehouse to be viewed? Again, this could be a very quick thing. It could be done daily, weekly, monthly. Are the pass downs being done to the various shift supervisors? Is the fire extinguishers hung and charged? And then you have staff inspection. And again, a lot of this are things that can just be done at a glance. And then if there are issues, you take it up with whoever runs your security operation, again, whether it be in-house or a third party. Uniforms, do they fit? Are they wrinkle-free? Are they wearing the right footwear? Name tags, their badges, their cards that are required by the state to carry with them. Do they have their company ID? Are they meeting your standards in regard to their personal appearance? Today you can get some pretty crazy looks. We have another webinar that talks about RFPs and selection process. And I go into extensively in making sure that you've been clear with your provider about what you expect as to the staff who will be assigned to your site. Do they wear the large hoop earrings and have pink hair and long nails? Do the guys, do you want facial hair? Are they allowed to have a mohawk? Can they have a nose ring and a tongue ring? These are all things as the person who is responsible for making sure that the people who greet your residents and guests and make that first impression on outsiders meet your standards. And really what they should do is to be ambassadors of your community and reflect the professionalism at the level you want it to be reflected. So personal hygiene, are they using professional greetings and standardized greetings? We had my staff all had a standardized greeting. We all answered the phone the same way. When a guest vehicle rode up, we greeted that guest or that vendor or that visitor the same way. It was standard. And it was always obviously very welcoming and service oriented. So do the staff members have, again, we're going back to how it reflects in your community. Do they have professional and courteous attitude and demeanor? Are they waving to residents as they enter the community, or when the resident pulls into their community, what they see is somebody sitting there hunched over their cell phone, not paying attention to what's going on? Are reports being written properly? Are they being reviewed and forwarded to you? Here's an interesting aspect when I talk about this. So the reports being written, reviewed, forwarded to the property manager. What I find with a lot of these companies that have the software that do the reports and do the inspections, what they do is, I call it a data dump. So what occurs is they can do all these reports and they have all these inspection points. And what they do at the end of a 24-hour period, the property manager gets this huge data dump, and it could be 50 pages long. Well, the property managers are going to look at that maybe one time or twice, and they're never going to look at it again because they don't have time to go through 50 pages of a patrol tour data dump that shows every spot they went to and things of that nature. What you should be getting, because if that's happening to you, you need to stop that with your security provider. You should be getting what are called exception reports. That means if everything was done the way it was supposed to be done in the software on the patrol tour, I don't want to know about it. I only want to know when patrol points were missed. I only want to know when a report of some significant incident occurred. I don't want 50 pages saying everything was great, we got no problems here. I want to see 3 pages of all the things that either weren't done or were out of place, needed to be maintained, needed to be repaired. So it's not uncommon for these companies to do these data dumps. And what it does, it overwhelms property management and it gets ignored. So you can have those data dumps fine-tuned to just exception reports that ultimately you only get the things that are important that you need to address. A big one we have is also the training on the post orders. I find that it's a constant problem. It's not being done. And that's something that, again, that's going to require you inspecting what you expect and maybe periodically quizzing new staff on how things are supposed to be done. Patrol inspections, if you have patrols, I will tell you, when I go and I do my security assessments and I look in these vehicles, it looks like a homeless person's in there. Nobody's taking care of it. And this needs to be done because you never know when a resident, a guest, a visitor, you're going to have to give them a ride, or there's going to be an emergency, and the cleanliness of the vehicle and the care of the vehicle, that reflects on your community. What equipment are you requiring in that vehicle? Do you require a fire extinguisher, AED, first aid, flashlights, traffic cones? These are all things that should be established in the RFP and the expectations in the contract when you have it, or if you're you take care of your security in-house. These are all things that you need to determine ahead of time. What should we have in the vehicle? What are our expectations of our staff? Are these things being inspected? Is the AED charged and ready to go? Is the first aid kit filled? Does the flashlight work? Does the fire extinguisher have a charge, or it hasn't been looked at in 5 years? Again, these are things that can be done relatively quickly, again, on a daily, weekly, or monthly basis. Depends how large or small your operation is. Let's see. I talk about track tick here. Track tick is just an example of officer accountability reporting, guard tour software. Is it being set up properly? Is it being used properly? Things of that nature. And then we go into maintenance issues. You know, are your gate operators being inspected? Do you have a maintenance program, or is the company, we required our staff to inspect them on a regular basis or your maintenance personnel? Do you want to wait until the belt breaks or something burns up? Or do we want to do preventive maintenance so that we don't have those issues? Are your camera software and recording equipment maintained? I can't tell you how many properties I go to, and the sprinklers hit half the cameras, and half the cameras with this well water, you can't see what you're supposed to see through that camera because nobody's maintaining them, nobody's keeping them up. Is the gatehouse being cleaned? Filters being changed on the AC system? Is the access control software, is that up to date? Is that being maintained? Or is it 20 years old and just one day it's going to burn up and break, and now you're at a loss because now you have no access to it? Do you have a backup generator or battery backups on all of your computers and monitors? And if you have kiosks, are they being properly maintained? Again, I go to these sites all the time, and there's open wire boxes, wires exposed. It's just like once it was installed, everything was forgotten about. So that's just a list that I've created and things that I've witnessed over my travels between, as far west as Las Vegas and Hilton Head all the way to Miami. So I do this all over, and I see these all the time. Ashley, did we want to do any questions at this point, or are we good holding them to the end?
You know what? There's one here that asks if there's a similar checklist for any access control doors, such as clubhouse, pool areas.
So you'll have to see if I'm catching that right, but in what we call guard tour software, and I think there's a list of it coming up. You can program that to where your officers are required to go to whatever door you want. And part of it, and I think we're coming up on this. Oh, here we go. That was a great intro, Ashley. Thank you.
Here we go.
So here are examples of software. I don't endorse anyone over the other, but here are the names of the manufacturers of the various types of guard tour software that's out there and available, where you can program these points. Now, I recommend the ones that are based on GPS, but you can also have it where it's GPS based so that you can require that officer to go up and down every street in your community. Or if in a condo, you can also have tags that are placed throughout your condo, or your doors, your mechanical rooms, your wherever it may be, where they have to physically be there and actually scan that tag. In addition, you can make it to where not only do they have to scan that tag or physically be there through GPS, again, whether it's GPS based or tag based, you can also require questions be answered. So if you want to know, if you put this at the pool house or a fitness center, they're required to go inside, scan the tag, and you can ask questions. You can require questions be answered, like, are all the lights off? Is the equipment shut down? Are the whirlpools off? Is the steam room empty? I mean, there's nothing you can't do. It goes back to your imagination. I can tell you where I was at. Our guard tour, it was programmed. We did ours through ABDI and what they call their pulse system, their iPulse. And I will tell you, for safety reasons, we were so specific that we would do our nightly fitness center inspections, and my officers used to have to go check the steam room to make sure that somebody didn't pass out in the steam room or in a hot tub or in the salt room or wherever the case may be. And you can do the same thing with your mechanical rooms. You can require that your officer enters your mechanical rooms and say they have to tell you what the temperature of the water was or the pressure on a pump. Again, these can be used. It's your imagination that determines all the things that you want to be able to track or verify they're being inspected, and it can be done through this software. So I'm hoping that answered your question, but it's really going to go back to your imagination. And these aren't, some of these are inexpensive, very inexpensive. They'll do the guard tour, the inspections, the questions. You could even do your clock in and clock out through these softwares. So there's lots of them out there, and it's just up to you to figure out which one works best for your application. Should I continue, Ash?
Yeah, go ahead. A few of these on here, we can wait for some of these until the end.
So access control. So whether you have a patrol or not is one thing, but access control is huge. One of the things that I find when I travel, I've got 2 communities I'm doing up here pretty soon in Windermere, and I just got a copy of the post orders, because a big part of what I do is post order review to make sure the policies are relevant, they're defendable, lawful, and reasonable. And what I find is a lot of times security companies just throw in these generic post orders, and understand post orders are just policies and procedures, how things should be done. How does the community want things done? Well, you really can't do generic, because every community has unique requirements on how they want things handled. So although there are some standard post orders that really don't change, When it comes to access control, they are typically very site specific and should be customized for each individual community. So they should be established. The security provider should get the input from the property manager or GM. They should write them up. They should be reviewed by the GM or property manager, obviously with knowing what the board expects. And then ultimately the board or the GM or property manager needs to sign off on them and say, yes, this is how we want these situations handled. So the types of situations I'm talking about are how the residents gain access to the community, how guests gain access to the community, how vendors gain access to the community, how utility companies gain access to the community, how delivery drivers gain access to the community. All of this should be in your access control post orders, should be approved by the GM or the board, and that gives clear direction to your security provider, whether it's in-house or third party. Then your residents have to know about these policies, because you don't want them taking it out on your security staff or your access control staff. If you have rules about the time vendors are allowed to enter the community, or maybe also just as importantly, when they must be off property, these are all things the residents need to be educated on. So anything that dictates guest, another example, some communities require a driver's license. Some don't require a driver's license. They just need government issued photo ID. Some will say if you don't produce a physical driver's license, then you will not be allowed to drive into our community. Now, these are all things that your attorney, your community's attorney, needs to give you guidance on. But regardless, they all change from property to property and lawyer to lawyer. So it's important that your residents understand what the policies are so that they don't take it out on your access control or your security personnel for simply enforcing what the board said how they wanted to operate. Your security or access control staff must be trained and then tested. There's the inspect what you expect. In other words, somebody needs to monitor them to make sure that they are implementing the requirements that you have on how people get in and out of the community. This is how security breaches happen. This is how homes get burglarized, cars get stolen. When I go and I do an assessment in a community, many times I will attempt to what I call socially engineer my way into the property. I will try and talk my way past that guard. I've taken my kids and I've had my teenage kids physically just walk I drop them off at the street and just let them walk through a pedestrian gate or walk around by the gate arm and just walk right into the property. So it's important that the staff are trained and then periodically they are tested to make sure that they are doing what they are supposed to be doing. Now, access control software, there's a ton of different access control softwares out there, depending upon how complex you want to be. I told you that the one, we use the ABDI Pulse system. And again, I was able to tell my staff how many times they'd go up and down every street, inspecting the hot tubs, the fitness centers, the tennis courts. Very, very complex. And anytime they didn't do it, I was alerted, and then there would have to have been a report as to why something wasn't done as required. You have property management companies that have proprietary software. You have security companies that have proprietary software, or you can have third-party software that it doesn't matter who's doing the job. What happens is you own the license to that software, and whether it's, it doesn't matter what property management company or what security company you use, the third part, you pay for that third-party software, and your security companies can come and go. You have the same system. It's important to know that and decide which way you want to go with that, because if you do buy proprietary software, where does all that data go if you decide you want to get rid of your security company? And they need to be able to tell you that. And if they say, well, no, we own all of this, once we're gone, if, we're gone, and so is our software and our iPads and our computers. So those are things you need to think about when purchasing access control software, third party or proprietary. So some of the features, the big features you can get, that they've been around forever, but every time I go to a community, I'm astonished that they're not being utilized. One of the things that affects the effectiveness and efficiency of your access control operation is really your failure of your residents to properly use the technology that's currently there. So you have all of this software, and the residents have the ability to manipulate, add, delete, and modify guest lists and vendor lists and all of this information. And yet they don't use it. They wait for a guard to call them and tell them their vendors there or their guests there. Well, meanwhile, when you do this, and I'm preaching to the choir, there's 20 cars in line, you're backed out onto the major roadway, the police are saying, why aren't you processing? And it's all because the residents don't want to use the software and what's available to them to help make it a more expedient operation and efficient operation. A lot of them say they don't do it because they want to be notified when the guest gets there, the vendor gets there. Well, all the software today has email and or text notifications that when your vendor or guest comes through the gate and is checked in, you get a text message. So there are a lot of features with this. You also have the ability to go back and look at what guests were there in the software from your profile. You have the ability to see on what days vendors were there, when they came in. I mean, the excuses are no longer valid. For a long time, it had to do with technology and residents' incompatibility with technology, but I don't know anybody who doesn't have a smartphone now and things of that nature. You also, there's software out there or programs out there now that you can have where all your vendors are screened for criminal history and to make sure that you are not letting in sex offenders or recently convicted violent felons, burglars, and thieves from working in your community, in your house, around your house. Okay, so I've been seeing this lately where it seems like in order to try and save money, some communities are trying to staff a gatehouse or a front desk or things of that nature with property management staff versus having a security provider come in. When it comes to a gatehouse out front in a gatehouse, I don't recommend that it be staffed by someone. It needs to be staffed by either someone who's doing your in-house security / access control. If it's a condo situation or a building situation where it's a kind of a concierge type situation, then I think that's fine. But you have to be very careful when you start placing people who have no training, no licenses. When you hire either in-house or a third-party provider, that person has a license issued by the state after having attended a certain classes. And the purpose of that is there's a multitude of reasons. But what happens is part of the training they receive is de-escalation and dealing with the public and things of that nature. It helps, to me, I believe it reduces your exposure to liability when you're putting a licensed person out there if things don't go well. If you're just hiring somebody off the street who has no certification, no training, no license, you better have an extensive training program that's documentable, so that if something does happen, you have some form of reasonable defense and you can show all that you've done to train them. And the training has to be relevant and realistic. It just can't be that the property manager said, here are your duties. So I think communities really need to think long and hard about just hiring somebody off the street, doing an 8-hour or 1 or 2 day training with them, and then now all of a sudden they're controlling access to your community, whether it be, again, a condo or a HOA or POA.
Hey, Mark, I think we have a few questions here that would work really well right now.
Okay.
You kind of touched on this, but what is the defined role of access control gate attendant versus a security guard?
Well, it goes back to what I said in the beginning. You can call them what you want to call them, and 20 different attorneys will give you 20 different reasons why you should call them one or the other. In the end, what they're functioning as is controlling access to a community. Mm-hmm. One of the things I do in another webinar is talk about the limitations of security, and we'll talk about the state of Florida. In the state of Florida, we are what's called an observe and report state. That means security doesn't chase people, security doesn't handcuff people, security doesn't do those things. They are supposed to be great witnesses. They observe and they report while conducting access control operations or patrol operations. But security is not going to be running and jumping and going into active shooter buildings and pulling people out of fires. If your community has that belief, then they're misinformed, and they need to talk to their provider and get clear guidance on what it is that they will and won't do. But in the state of Florida, you have these communities that say, well, we don't have security, we have access control. I get it. But the people doing access control have a Florida security D license in their possession. So again, tomato, you call them what you want to call them. In the end, they are doing access control for your community, but they're not cops, they're not law enforcement, and they're not going to be chasing people down or jumping in front of cars.
Yeah. And then one more here. What about virtual guards at access control? What are the pros and cons?
So it's something that I'm doing right now on 2 different projects. There are 3 questions you have to ask when you talk about things like this. One, what is you or your community's perception, or what do you want your security to be, or how secure do you want to be? 2, how tolerant are you of security? Meaning, do you want your guests to have to provide government issued photo ID? Do you want to make sure your vendors aren't sex offenders? How tolerant are you of these types of things? And then lastly, and probably the most important, is what is it you want to pay or not pay to reach the level of security that you want? So ultimately, a virtual guard, there's no physical man there. You're just speaking with someone, but there's cameras that see everything. If you are extremely tight on your budget, a virtual guarding is certainly a way to go. You can do also what's called a hybrid model, where, say, for example, if you want to try and save some money, your morning and afternoon shift are manned, and then at a certain time, say 10 p.m. or 11 p.m., the guardhouse is locked up, the kiosk is there, and people pull up to the kiosk, push the button, or somebody greets them, and they're doing it remotely or virtually, and that person can remotely open the gates, close the gates, things of that nature. So it certainly has advantages, especially when it comes to the financial aspect. And now technology is to the point to where it's very reliable. There are some companies out there. There's one in particular that's been doing it for a very long time that's developed a bad reputation. So you have to be careful when you pick the virtual option. I don't have a problem with the kind of the hybrid model, but you do have to be careful when you get involved with the just straight out 100% remote guarding or virtual guarding. Because if something happens with the gates or the gate arms, that virtual guard can't come out. As where if you have a hybrid model and you're attached to, say, a company, that company could probably call somebody out and respond and address problems. But there are pros and cons, and I have these conversations. I welcome anybody to reach out to me, and I can talk more about them offline.
Awesome. Thanks, Mark. I think that's it then for right now. We'll save the rest for the end.
Yeah, let me breeze through these real quick. The post orders are extremely important because they establish the guiding principles, the procedures, expectations of your staff. They must be approved by the board. They've got to be relevant and defendable, and they should be reviewed annually or anytime there's a policy change. The one community I'm doing right now, I looked, their policy procedures are 8 years old names, old phone numbers, old procedures, and nobody's keeping up with it. Don't rely on your security provider to review and update it. Make it part of your annual review with them. You require it. It should include all the procedures for your residents, guests, vendors, ride share, like we talked about, utility company, delivery, surveyors, process service. There are some of these are guided by state statute, and then some are just whatever the community rules are. But it's important to have somebody who knows the difference and helps you develop these. You should also include scenario-based. So if you have a trespassing pedestrian, what do your policies say you need to do? If a vehicle piggybacks, what are you calling 911? If you don't have a patrol officer, are you calling the property man? I mean, what are you doing? So there should be scenario-based guidance in there as well. Give them the answers to the most prominent issues or important issues. This goes back to what we just were talking about, that you are licensed security guards in the state of Florida are extremely limited to what they can and can't do. They're not going to be arresting people. And again, I'm talking about residential security. There are some exceptions, but in the residential environment, they're not going to be chasing people, putting them in handcuffs, jumping in front of cars, running into clubhouses for active shooters. They should not be having handcuffs, pepper spray, impact weapons, firearm, that's your choice. But I don't recommend any of that for the residential security environment unless you're in a very high crime area. It's important to educate the residents on the limitations and the authority of security staff because they think there's nothing they can't do. So I know you like to start summing things up here the last 10 or 15 minutes. So go ahead, Ash.
Thanks for watching. For more great educational content, click the subscribe button now.